Right. So, I mean, in the first year, the Russian economy did shrink by
Mm,
1.2% as a result of the sanctions. But of course, it recovered on the back of high oil prices, prices that were high because of the very war that Putin started.
hmm
And I do think that that is the central challenge. Until you get at Russia's oil revenues, it's going to be really hard to hit the Russian economy where it hurts. Um, but I also think that the sanctions take time to build pressure. And what you see now is that pressure really starting to play out. Inflation remains very
hmm
high in Russia partly as a result of the sanctions, as well as Putin's record spending on the war. But inflation is still at roughly 9%, almost 9%. Interest rates are at 19%, and are likely to potentially go up further as a way of trying to
hmm
cool the economy. And I think crucially, Russia is facing payment problems as a
hmm
result of sanctions. There are delays in payments, and particular problems with payments from China. You
hmm
see in Russia the cost of borrowing in Chinese yuan shoot up, partly because Washington very effectively threatened to impose sanctions on foreign financial institutions last December if they did business with the Russia's military industrial complex. And it then widened that threat
hmm
in June. And that I think did have an effect. You can see it in terms of the delays in payments in Russia. And the uh, Bloomberg's own economist has projected that the Russian economy will slow to 1.2% next year.
hmm
So I think they're facing some real challenges. The labor shortage is a massive one, that they don't have enough manpower really to continue this war, both in terms of staffing of defense factories as well as recruiting for the meat grinder in Ukraine. And I think that that is going to pose serious challenges, going forward for the Russian economy. Whether or not it will be enough and in time to have an effect, it is unclear. I do think that the U.S. could have threatened these so-called secondary sanctions on foreign financial institutions back in 2022, and that would have had a much more chilling effect. It's unfortunate that that threat only came, relatively late, because you see, just they didn't even have to do anything. Just the mere threat of it has sent a chill through Chinese banks, worried about being cut off from the U.S. dollar. Because if you look at Chinese trade data, the amount of business they're doing with Russia is relatively small in the greater scheme of things. They don't want to be cut off from the US dollar for the sake of this relatively small business with Russia. Yes, China and Russia have their no limits partnership, but I think China's own economic interests lie elsewhere. So I think that the US could be putting a lot more pressure on the Chinese banks to cut off that trade, because China has really been keeping the Russian economy going.